The markets right now with Evan Lucas from Investsmart. Evan, great to see you. Off the back of Wall Street last week, the flurry of tweets from Donald Trump and the worsening trade war, the outlook this week doesn't look too great, Evan.
No, it doesn't, Kieran, and already US futures actually open up on Sunday night for them, and they fell around about 350 points. So that goes hand in hand with Friday night's close, which was very, very strong, as you alluded to. It's, again, what's really not just the US-China trade war issue, it's the fact that the president is possibly invoking the IEEPA sort of emergency powers to actually look at possibly forcing US companies out of China. And that is a big hitter for particularly something like the Dow, because that would hit a company like GM, Ford, Tesla, Apple, Microsoft, which all manufacture a lot of their products in China. And that in itself is probably the most concerning thing about his tweets, particularly over the weekend, and why US corporates see this as a massive headwind to trade. They've all come out in almost a unified voice and pointed to that and said this is basically a big issue for us with regards to costs. It's a big issue to business as usual. Bringing it back would therefore see consumers paying higher pricing, because to actually repatriate all of their manufacturing back into the US, get factories started, employment started, and then actually doing that as a modus of operandi on a continuous basis, the cost is astronomical. So that is what's really concerning. And that's what, US corporates look at it from that perspective, going to have to fork out the money just to get that going would take probably at least 5 years. And then the cost of higher wages anyway and higher manufacturing costs in the States would also be. So that was the big takeout, is it's not just the ramp up in the tariffs, it's the possible impact of the emergency powers, which look very hard to get through. Can't laugh at it, but it looks very, very unlikely. But again, it's just that threat.
Yeah, well, as you said, the costs would be astronomical, given how intertwined the economies are, despite and in the context of the tariffs and the trade war. It almost seems impossible to undertake that, doesn't it? I mean, it is just so deep into their economy.
Yeah, it is, and I think that probably is the way to put it to you. Not only that, don't dismiss the idea that there would be Supreme Court challenges to this. So you can't not argue that an Amazon, an Apple, a Facebook, the tech space in the States that are heavily invested into China wouldn't actually take this to the Supreme Court in the US and challenge, the president's reasoning behind it, and that would therefore, again, drag this process out. You'd also look at it, as I said, your GM and Fords are the most interesting one out of this, because, that means part manufacturers. There are parts of, a setup of a car that come from China. To have to bring those parts back to the US, it's a specialised scenario, and that therefore also means that you would, that all of that cost brings over the top. So it's a big, big story. I think the other thing that happened over the weekend is, again, there was certainly veiled talk also that, tariffs aren't just going to be aimed at China from the president. He is certainly starting to talk about Europe as well. And that's the next sort of level of this, being in the G7 right now, being in France. The auto tariffs that could go towards Germany and France are the next thing you can hear. It is rhetoric that's coming there. But it's a big movement over the weekend, and markets are not going to like it. It is already clear that we're going to lose at least 100 points this morning, and then it's a question of how much he doubles down on it now.
Well, and I mean, if that was the only row that Trump had right now, that would be enough, but it's not. He's got his own fight with Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, as well, which in itself is just a massive story, so unprecedented. It's
astonishing, isn't it? I mean, who would have thought that the head of the central bank in the US is actually basically having a war of words with the head of the country? And the way, the language that Trump is using at Powell, as you just alluded to, Kieran, is the astonishing part. The fact that he is basically making him out as being almost, the word is probably anti-American in terms of what he's trying to paint him as, to say that he's obstructing their movement, he's obstructing growth. All of that comes into it. And what's now unprecedented is the fact that you can hear that Powell's actually swiped back. So over the weekend at Jackson Hole, the annual get-together of all of the main central bankers, including our own Philip Lowe, was there. He did make the case that the headwinds facing the economy are trade, the trade policies, etc., are certainly creating issues around growth, and that is the first time I've actually heard him say that explicitly. It's clearly he's not going to single out the president, but it is a veiled swipe, and that in itself was also unprecedented. To see a central banker actually go back at the president and actually point out that their policies are becoming a headwind, that their current trajectory is also going to be a problem for the country.
Evan Lucas, we'll talk to you later in the week.
Thanks, Kieran.